Well, now joined by Rachel Ziemba, Senior Research Analyst with Roubini Global Economics. Rachel, thank you for coming in. All right, so what does Tony Hayward now need to do? I mean, there's this speculation he will go to Russia, possibly look at divesting. We haven't had confirmation of that yet, and it looks like he may not be doing the trip after all. Do you think this is what he needs to do?
I don't know if it's what he needs to do, but I do think that Russia is a key part of BP's portfolio, as we've just heard. And so whether or not it's Tony Hayward or someone else from the organization, I'm sure they're continuing to look very closely at their operations there. After all, we know that some of BP's subsidiaries there are facing financial issues. They continue to face regulatory issues with the Russian authorities. This has not been necessarily an easy relationship for BP over the last several years, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon.
So do you think that if they, for example, be looking at actually divesting some of the assets there to pay for some of the costs in the Gulf of Mexico?
I mean, that's definitely a possibility. We know that they're planning to sell a number of assets around the world. Some of them could be in Russia. But the other thing we have to think about is that as in the natural course of a company like BP, one thinks about divesting and selling off assets in order to raise capital for new assets as fields mature, as others, take them on. So I would imagine that BP will likely be selling more assets, but I think they're going to be very wary of selling things at fire sale prices, because that would make people seem even more vulnerable and bottom feeding.
Yeah, and make them look desperate. But in Russia, who would they sell to? Would Mr. Medvedev and Mr. Putin have a very strong hold on actually what they do? The relationship with TNK-BP was such a difficult one.
Certainly, and in general in the Russian oil sector, the government is very involved, whether it's on the case of government-owned companies tending to have majority shares, or the government take of oil proceeds. There's actually an ongoing debate about the tax incentives or not to the Russian oil sector more broadly, and in the next year we're going to see that continuing to come to play. So I would say the major Russian companies might be interested in some of these assets. I would say that some of these companies are a bit cash strapped themselves, and they might not necessarily have as much cash on hand to make these purchases. These are companies that, by virtue of the fact that the government takes most of the proceeds above a certain level of oil price, continue to seek out funds in the global market or from China or from other sources. So it's not clear to me who would necessarily buy the assets.
Rachel, overall, how has this BP saga actually changed the way that oil companies look at their business, offshore drilling, but also elsewhere, how your relationship changes with the government?
Sure. I mean, I think that this is a reminder also of the importance of the technical staff and the importance of getting these things right, casing these wells effectively, all the things that a lot of oil engineers might know, but making sure that one doesn't cut corners. I also think beyond the relationships with governments that it's very important the relationships with the operators and the relationships with all these subcontractors that are taking on some parts of these wells and operations. But I think around the world, governments are also thinking about the fact that they need to regulate these companies in a different way, and maybe in some cases to bring more expertise on shore and to really think, is this safe? What are the costs? But I would say that this is taking place on the backdrop of an ongoing debate about what the role of the government should be in regulating and what the state take, what the benefits to how much of the revenues that are being generated should go to the government.